Last time we talked about a man picking himself up off the floor, walking away from one of the biggest rock bands on the planet, retreating to his mum's pub in London, relocating to Munich, and quietly recording a blues and soul album that almost nobody heard. But here's the thing about David Coverdale, he wasn't done finding himself yet. Because if the solo album Whitesnake was the sound of a man escaping his past, Northwinds is the sound of a man finally deciding who he wants to be. And buried somewhere in those sessions is one of the best kept secrets in classic rock history, a surprise cameo from a certain legendary vocalist, one that could only have happened because of a very complicated web of friendships, feuds, and late nights in a Munich recording studio. We'll get to that, but first, let's catch you up. By March of 1976, Deep Purple was done. Substance abuse, internal warfare, creative exhaustion. The band had burned itself down to the foundation, and Coverdale walked. He drafted a formal resignation letter, crashed at his mom's pub to decompress, and then relocated to Munich with his soon-to-be wife, Julia, to escape the chaos of the British music scene. There, he linked up with guitarist Moody, a friend from before the Deep Purple years, and started writing music that deliberately pointed away from hard rock. They wrote blues, funk, soul, gospel, with producer Roger Glover behind the board and a cast of jazz and session players in the studio. The resulting album, simply titled Whitesnake, 2 words, came out. It was released in February 1977. It barely made a ripple commercially, but it proved something important. Coverdale could operate on his own terms. The problem was, it also showed that he hadn't quite figured out what those terms were yet. And by the time he came back to record Northwinds in 1977, released in early 1978, something had shifted. The caution was gone, the tentative experimental quality of the debut had been replaced by something more focused and more deliberate, and frankly, more powerful. Coverdale had recovered emotionally, and you can hear it in every single track. But the sound didn't just change because Coverdale's mindset did. It changed because he overhauled the band. Moody was back on guitar, absolutely essential as always. Tim Hinckley returned on keyboards, Roger Glover once again producing and contributing synth and clavinet. But the rhythm section was completely rebuilt, and that made all the difference. Out went the funky, syncopated session players from the debut. In came bassist Alan Spenner, who made his name playing in Joe Cocker's Grease Band, a guy with a gritty, locked-in rock and soul pocket that hit completely differently than anything on the first record. And on drums, Tony Newman replaced the teenage prodigy Simon Phillips. Newman had drummed for Jeff Beck and David Bowie, and he brought an aggressive, hard-hitting approach that pushed the whole band into heavier gear. The difference these two guys made is hard to overstate. Suddenly, Coverdale's voice, that deep, soulful, chest-resonant instrument, had a foundation underneath it that matched its weight. It wasn't a session band playing carefully, this was a rock band swinging hard. The lineup wasn't finished there either. Lee Brilleaux, the legendary frontman of Dr. Feelgood, came in to blow harmonica on the opening track. Graham Prescott added haunting violin arrangements. The horn section was expanded with trumpet and trombone. And for backing vocals, the Chanter sisters, Irene and Doreen, joined returning vocalist Liza Strike to form a soulful trio. And Ronnie James Dio showed up, but we'll get to that. The album opens with Keep On Giving Me Love, and it announces the shift immediately. It's the loose, danceable, funk-driven blues jam, but there's muscle to it, and that wasn't there before. And then Lee Brilleaux steps in with that blistering harmonica solo. Sounds like it was recorded in a sweaty roadhouse at 2 in the morning. It's raw, it's alive, it sets the tone perfectly. Track 2 is the title cut, Northwinds. It's one of the most atmospheric things Coverdale ever recorded. Starts with a melancholic piano medley, builds slowly through Moody's delicate acoustic playing, and then Graham Prescott's electric violin comes in, cold, mournful, almost eerie, and suddenly the whole thing swells into this gospel-tinged emotional centerpiece. It sounds like winter, it sounds like isolation, and Coverdale's vocal sits right in the middle of it, more commanding and controlled than anything on the debut. Give Me Kindness is where the party happens, a horn-heavy, New Orleans-soaked Southern soul track. That's one of the sunniest songs Coverdale has ever put his name on. And this is where the story gets interesting because the rowdy backing vocals on the track include some very famous faces. More on that in a moment. Time and again, closes side one. It's the most stripped back moment on the record. Just Coverdale at the electric piano, essentially alone, showcasing that rich lower register before some subtle electric violin and strings, and it all comes in the ending. It's intimate in a way that feels genuinely brave. Side two is where Northwinds becomes something else entirely. Queen of Hearts is the real turning point. It was co-written by Moody and opens with a deceptively soft piano intro before dropping into a heavy, thumping groove driven by that slide guitar that Moody does better than almost anyone. Critics have pointed to this track as the clear sonic preview of what early Whitesnake it would be, and they're right. If you played this to someone without telling them who it was, they'd probably guess it was from Love Hunter or Ready and Willing. Then comes Only My Soul, which might be the finest vocal performance on either of Coverdale's solo albums. It starts as a quiet acoustic lament, hushed, fragile, and then Roger Glover's synthesizer starts building this slow, eerie tension underneath it. And the track escalates line by line until Coverdale absolutely opens up in the final section. It's a masterpiece of pacing, and it's criminal that more people haven't heard it. Say that you need me. Say You Love Me brings back Simon Phillips and the Leslie Harper on the debut for one track, a heavy, soulful rock groove with a soaring Ron Asbury saxophone solo that connects the two records in a satisfying way, and the album closes with Breakdown, the heaviest, most aggressive thing Coverdale had put his name on since Deep Purple. He wrote it as a direct cathartic response to the toxic collapse of his old band, staccato guitar riffs, frantic pace, zero compromise, the blueprint for early Whitesnake right there on the final track of a solo album most people haven't even heard. Now, about that Ronnie James Dio cameo. The connection starts with Roger Glover. Before Coverdale joined Deep Purple, Glover had been the band's bassist, and after leaving, he'd gone to produce Dio's old band Elf on his solo concept record. That brought Dio into the extended Deep Purple universe. Shortly after, Ritchie Blackmore poached Dio from the entire Elf lineup to form Rainbow, which, if you've been following the series and I have videos on it, just check the playlist. I talked about Rainbow before, and you will know it's happening almost exactly the same time all the Coverdale solo stuff was going on. Rock and roll in the 70s was a very small world. So when Coverdale was recording Northwinds at Musicland Studios in Munich, Rainbow were working down the hall on Long Live Rock and Roll. Dio and his wife Wendy were in the building. They knew Glover. They dropped by. Drinks were had. And when it came time to record the backing chorus for Give Me Kindness, that big, rowdy barroom choir, Coverdale and Glover just grabbed everyone in the building, engineers, assistants, Micky, Moody, and yes, Ronnie James Dio and Wendy Dio, shouting along with the rest of them. The reason you can't really pick Dio out of the mix is because he's buried in a crowd of a dozen people all bellowing together, no operatic metal soaring, no dramatic delivery, just Ronnie James Dio, one of the greatest rock vocalists who ever lived, anonymously singing a honky-tonk chorus in a Munich studio at some ungodly hour of the night. He couldn't be officially credited either. Label contracts, Polydor had him tied to Rainbow, the whole thing, so he appears in the liner notes simply as part of the chorus line hidden in plain sight. And here's the extra wrinkle. Ritchie Blackmore, who ran Rainbow like an absolute dictator and was notoriously territorial about his musicians, was almost certainly aware of what had happened down the hall. Blackmore and Coverdale were actively trading insults in the British press. At that point, Coverdale had publicly mocked Rainbow as Ritchie Blackmore's raincoat. Blackmore was not amused. By some accounts, the tension between them eventually boiled over into a full backstage fistfight on a European tour, with drummer Cozy Powell reportedly steering Blackmore directly to Coverdale's dressing room door to let nature take its course. The fact that Dio was cozied up in Coverdale sessions while all this was going on probably didn't help. But here's the thing about Northwinds. Whatever was happening in the hallways, in the dressing rooms, and the British music press, the music is brilliant. It's a record that does exactly what a second album should do. Takes the tentative experiments of the debut, throws out what didn't work, keeps what did, and pushes everything forward with more confidence and muscle. And by the time Coverdale finished these sessions, he wasn't really thinking about solo records anymore. He was thinking about forming a proper band. The musicians were already there. The sound was already there. The name had been there since that fourth track on the fourth record. All that was left to make it official. Next time we're going to cover exactly how that happened, the formation of Whitesnake as a live band, and the release of the Snakebite EP that put everything in motion. So that will be next. In the meantime, check out this playlist with Deep Purple album reviews. I'm covering the entire story of Deep Purple from the beginning, talking about Deep Purple, Rainbow, Whitesnake, the Ian Gillan Band, and Gillan. I'll be doing all that. So check it out. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next one.